as time exists, everything decreases in entropy, which means everything falls into place and everything comes into perfection. And the third law is as time progresses or as time exists, we remember our future and not our past. And I realized, oh my gosh, that is such a fascinating insight for me, because that explains that everybody who has meditation or a spiritual experience of some kind gets a piece of the puzzle, sees themselves healed, sees themselves into some future scenario where things are worked out, or loved ones are reunited. And this is not something that we are taught through religious understanding, which came through somebody's brain, as something that happened to us in our past, that we fell from grace and we are these ugly sinners that just have to claw our way back to this perfection.
Go ahead.
Hey Trey, it's Marie Antoinette Kelley, and I'm on Your Superior Self with you, and I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I could tell. No nerves at all. Like, you're a professional. Professional. I don't know why you're so nervous. This is a free-flowing conversation. I'm nervous too. Yeah. You've written a book, the first children's book about near-death experiences, and we're here to share it with the world. I mean, I'm actually more excited than nervous, because I feel like this is going to be first of its kind, really,
Yeah, it is actually the first of its kind, because the books that are out there talking about death for kids, they talk about, how to handle your feelings or how to say goodbye to a loved one, but none of them really peek through the veil and allow children to understand what we now know happens when we die.
It's kind of complicated. What you've done is, because you've written a book for children, but children never buy books, right? Like, so
right.
how do you get the parents to buy the book to share with their children?
It's a good point, because I'm actually realizing that now, because death has been such a taboo for so long. No, the book is selling fine, but actually, because people ask me, are you reading this to children a lot? And I realize I'm still working with the parents so that they can read the book to children, because death has been taboo for so long, and it's been a scary topic for, probably as old as humanity. But with this information, I felt compelled to put this book out there, because I was a kid that was afraid of death, and that information back when I was a kid was really not out there. And now that it is out there, because there's a lot of people that have written stories about that near-death experience. And in fact, I saw a statistic that said that 1 in 25 Americans has had some brush with death and lived to tell about it. So the stories keep adding up, and there's experts that are studying this, such as Dr. Raymond Moody, and they're finding that there's common ingredients that are independent of the life a person lived, independent of their culture, their religion, and that is giving us an insight into what happens when we die. And then they write these books for adults. And I remembered being a kid that was really afraid of death. Like, it's the kids that want to know what happens when you die. They want to feel safe and secure. They're the ones with the questions. And so that's why I decided I needed to take this topic to children, because of course I could relate, but also because I saw a niche. It's not out there yet.
A question I always had growing up that would just boggle my mind. It wasn't really around death. It was more or less, and this is like one of those, you'll never be able to answer it. It's like one of those questions is like, who created God? Like, where did God come from?
Right.
Like, and I was always told, like, don't even think about that. Don't even ask that question. Right. But that was like growing up, that was like my number one question.
What was before the Big Bang, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. Right.
Was it nothingness? Was it nothing? Was it just, and then a thought, and then a thought came and exploded, right? And here we are.
And that's why it gets so interesting for me, because now that I'm a grown up, I love those questions, and I actually hang out in that territory a lot, and I try to study as much as I can from the world's philosophies and religions to get to these insights. But I realize all of that still hinges on even having an open curiosity about spirit, about the other side of ourselves. And that's, I think, one of the main ingredients one of the main benefits that I think the book like I wrote will give the children. So that the discussion isn't, do we live after we die? Do we, are we just going to end? Is this all there's to it? The discussion is freely accepting that we do go on. And now what? What can we do with that knowledge? And I think that is going to lead to questions like that. Because I think the more of us who start asking those questions freely, the more normal the topic is, the more we can integrate with our complete self, not just our physical self.
Spreading that awareness, that
Yeah.
awareness that we do not die with these bodies, but consciousness lives on. But again, it's conceptually hard to understand if you've been surrounded by dogma and programming for your entire life, right? And now you're coming across this content, and it may strike a chord with you, and it may bring up some trauma, it may bring up some type of resistance to this concept. And I think what you're doing is excellent, because you're trying to get to the individual at a young age where they can maybe open this idea of we do not die with the body. And your book, Danny's Day in Heaven, I think it's based off of Dannion. How do you say his name? Dannion Brinkley? Dannion Brinkley.
Yeah, Dannion. Yeah, yeah. I based it off of his for that very reason, of the effect that his story had on me. Because, like I mentioned already, I was a kid that was afraid of death, and because I didn't really have real meaningful answers, practical insights from people that had experienced it, all these unknowns turned into fear, and that made the topic far worse than it needed to be. Now that I do have answers, and so when I was an adult and I was able to search for some of these answers, and I read Dannion's book. My husband actually is the one who found it, and then he's a publicist, and he ended up calling Dannion and inviting him over to Montana, where I live, and so he took the invitation, and so I got to meet him personally and talk to him about what I had read in the book. And having a person with empirical evidence who had actually been dead and come back and remembered that, yeah, we are just in a body now, but there's so much more to us, and we live on, and here's some of these ingredients. It was just so reassuring and so comforting that it took it beyond philosophy or belief, that it helped me remember the way I felt as a kid, because that's, I think now, is part of the reasons that I had so many questions, that even though they didn't have answers, the questions were there because I remembered. I felt something that was beyond what your physical self interprets or what you get taught when you are in a school system or just in society. And I think there's a lot of kids like that out there. And I think, if anything, it's almost like we're taught to forget. We're taught to disconnect from that and say, life is only what we see, it's only what we teach you. It's, of course, it's a little richer than that, but the simplified version is discredit your spiritual experiences, and we don't know for sure anything beyond what our eyes can see. So it starts to create doubt in a child. And I wanted to take that away, because there is so much overwhelming evidence now that we don't die, and there is a continuum. We come from spirit, we enter a physical experience, and we go back to spirit. And I want children to remember that. I don't want them to have to forget. And then, if I can do anything to contribute to that and prevent an existential dread as a teenager, when you question everything and you don't know what's real and what's your purpose and all that, of course, there's a place for that. But the extent of it that is happening today, with the darkness that comes from not having the understanding that we are so much bigger than our physical selves, I feel is really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically asking, Socratic, what is it? Socratic questioning, where you just question everything,
Yeah.
why is this?
Yeah.
Before you met Dannion, right? What were you like prior to that? Was it, did you question everything? Like, you're writing a book about near-death experiences. So you definitely are writing about a subject that some people I resonate with. Actually, what's funny is the first near-death experience book Dannion wrote the foreword to, and I just refound it the other day, and that started me down my path. Like, near-death experiences started me down this rabbit hole of studying human consciousness, and like, what is it?
Yeah.
Like, what is it really? Like, what is my awareness? Like, why don't I die with the body? Like, do I die with the body? Or just researching those type of subjects, and then finding Raymond Moody's work, reading his literature. And then Life After Life, or something like that. Right. And then I had him on the show, and we had a great conversation. And I had like 2 long conversations on the phone with him. He's a brilliant man. Actually, speaking with him is like what got me fired up about psychology, to go back to school and like research more about the personality and the persona. And then it's just the rabbit hole keeps getting deeper and deeper for me. But near-death experiences is what set me down that path. Was it similar
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think, well, looking back now, I can see that as a child, I had an enormous amount of spiritual um, faculties open, I suppose, or just a sense of the subtle world beyond our physical selves. And then I was raised in a traditional Catholic upbringing, and in that tradition, of course, any spiritual experience kind of puts you right in the realm of religion or spirituality, because that's where those answers come from or hang out. And so the answers weren't there. And so my mom was trying to help me navigate that, but really didn't really know how to do it either until I was, and I had a lot of interaction, so to speak, with the other side that I couldn't make sense out of. And because I was not sure what was happening, I was scared of it. And I think that fear put me in a vibration where just uglier things started happening to me that I could make sense of. It was kind of like Stranger Things, that whole movie.
I
And
have not
so,
seen that. So,
well, I don't really watch it either, but there's the element that there's a lot of unexplained, mysterious, but yuck things that can happen to a child. And those things kind of happened to me as a child until my mom started actually praying the rosary for me, specifically at 11. And then something happened to me spiritually that it sealed up, and I started to get my bearings, and I started to feel more confident that life was a positive experience. Because underneath all of that, I had a homesickness always for something so beautiful and so indescribable that I couldn't touch. And that is something that I've worked with and healed and represented in this book that I wrote, the world of spirit that we really, I think, remember far more than we give ourselves credit for. And so, long story short, I went through that journey with my own, spiritual questions and finding insight and answers, kind of like a treasure hunt, just clues, finding clues through, leaving Catholicism because it was only just one angle on the picture, and then finding all the world's religions and different philosophies and taking like gems from them all until I got a big, pretty comprehensive sense of this language, that symbolic language of spirit that you find represented in all these traditions, and how to navigate that made me feel much stronger person. It made me feel more like I had a sense of purpose and meaning about my own life. And that's then something that I wanted to share with children so they can kind of cut that question short and get a little more confident a little earlier.
do you mind if I ask if you have children?
I have 3 children, yes, and
Right.
I have 2 grandchildren now.
Oh, wow.
My daughters are grown up. My son's 17, the youngest, and my oldest daughter has 2 grandkids. I mean, she has 2 kids that are my grandkids. So yes, there's always kids in my life, which I really love.
So did you test it out on them first, right?
Oh
Did you?
yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
What were
And I
what were
raised,
their thoughts?
well, but for my girls, actually, I've raised, because this book has been a long time in the making, since it's been kind of part of my journey of growing up as a, human being, I guess, understanding my own spiritual roots. And so I raised them with this story, even though it wasn't an official book. And so for them, it's really natural to think of ourselves as in, living this life in our bodies, but being so much more than that, coming from spirit and going back to spirit, and just having context for that whole realm of interaction. And so they're naturally passing it on to their kids, but I got a chance to get the book and then read it to my grandkids when it came in the mail. And it was just so fun to see them be so natural with it. And just, they refer to it as a golden land. And so they were really excited about just this golden land. And I just feel that it's natural to children to relate to life with such color and such, brightness as the other side represents for people, that I'm always seeing the familiarity with it. Like it feels like home to them. And that's exactly what I feel I was missing as a kid, like someone to help me orient to my true home, if that speaks to you as
Yeah.
familiar, because
Yeah.
this world is so drab and it's so broken and dysfunctional in so many ways, especially as the news represents it. And so as a kid, to have the confidence that this isn't all there's to it, I think is super important.
100%. I
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I can go down a rabbit hole. I'm trying not to, though. I will try to stick to this subject here
Yeah.
of your book and ask you questions that are relevant to that. But I have to ask you, going back to your childhood experiences with spiritual phenomena, have you reconnected with that world?
Yes, yes. Actually, for a whole phase, after my mom started saying prayers specifically to strengthen me, I realized there was something to the world of prayer right there. So that was a direct interaction with me and the spiritual realm and its positivity and its healing energy. So then, as I was a grown up, I spent a lot of time, seeking and finding answers and spiritual tools. So I did a lot of prayer, yoga, mantras, all of that. And so for about a 15-year period, I was really just invested in applying these tools, and in all of that, I got a lot stronger. And then they got to a point that I maxed it out, and I realized I didn't want to do anything anymore on the terms of other people's advice of how I should live or not live or interact with the spiritual realm, because I finally felt like I was strong enough that I could orient myself in it and just cross back into my own intuitive understanding of the other side. And then I kind of threw everything out and I started again. I reset myself and I said, okay, what's true for me and what resonates as an experience for me, in terms of relating to a spiritual world that underlies our physical existence. So I started taking back bit by bit the things that I had studied and learned about, and as I did that, the experiences started coming from, from within, and especially in my artwork. And I started connecting with, people that had passed away, but not in a spooky way or not in a way that people, maybe presented on TV or anything, but just as information or as knowledge or as feelings that I knew were not explainable by any other means than to say that was from a spirit realm or from this, a spirit communication. And things became more practical and more real for me. And I started to feel like I could live what I had been studying for so long rather than just, obey rules about
Sure.
God,
Yeah. Rules about God.
Yeah.
You think God has rules for us?
Well, that's how you're first taught when you're a kid, because I think kids are intuitively relating to the world, to the realm of God. I mean, they come from God. And I think the whole fact that you can't even say God anymore is so complex and complicated because people have so much baggage from having been told rules all their life. And so it even happened to me because these intuitive gifts that I had, the rules were that was a bad thing. So for a lot of time in my life, I felt really weird and I had to discredit all that and try and fit into what was normal. And I'm still trying to undo that because, what's
What's
normal
normal,
really,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where the rules come in. But I do think in all of that, having, spent my life studying it, that there's a fundamental or foundational structure, or it's more laws than rules, just the same way our physical reality has laws that, we operate by, laws of entropy, laws of time, that the same is true for spirit. And that when we understand how spirit, communicates, how it supports us, we can harness that power and work with it so much better. I don't think it's super random or anything goes. I think there's definitely, um, um, it operates on love, obviously,
Sure. Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's like you said, we're trying not to go down a rabbit hole, but yeah.
You're making it hard for me because like you're
Right.
dishing me up with these great nuggets of wisdom, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. What about the
Yeah.
phenomena when you were a child, right? Like you said, there was some negative stuff. Like what did you experience with that?
Well, that was like Stranger Things. And I've come to realize that I think it's because I myself was in a state of fear about what was happening to me that made my radar kind of, my antennas on fearful things or emotionally heavy things. And so those were my experiences, like, that I didn't enjoy living. But as I grew up into an adult and I started questioning, why are we not sharing with our children that death is not real, that we go on after death, and then we can begin building on the power of spirit to support us, I started wanting to validate for myself, what's near-death experiences like. And I realized that, for a long period of time, I started to, romanticize the other side, like, because now all of a sudden this was a real thing. People had validated, they had come back, and not only was it a real thing, it was an unbelievably magnificent, unconditionally loving, full of knowledge and brightness kind of world. And I was like, I wanted to go there because I remembered it, and so I realized that in hungering for that, I romanticized it a little bit. And it's so funny because what funny is not the right word, but those spiritual truths that be careful what you ask for because you may receive it. Well, after 10 years or so of studying near-death experiences and wanting to know everything about it and wanting other people to understand its healing power, I was pregnant with my son, and I had an opportunity to have a near-death experience because we had a trauma birth and I had 60 seconds to live. And I was thinking to myself, oh my, here I go down that rabbit hole, right? And I was like, I had studied it, I had lived its spiritual truths, and I had already come to terms with the fact that this made sense for me, that what these people saying was actually represented in my own life as my spiritual experiences, with my heart resonating with, conversations and truth. And so by the time I had my own option, like have that near-death experience, very big surprise to myself, I clenched my fist and I said, hell no, I'm not going. I already know that this is real. I don't need to go through the trauma that people have to go through in order to make sense out of life again when they come back. So I actually did face death, but I don't have it. For me, it was a black out again. Of course, I was drugged out, with all sorts of medicine in order to keep me functioning. I was out for 10 hours, but once they brought me back, I was once again super intuitive and sensitive in the same way that these people that have near-death experiences describe. So the only piece that was missing for me in that dramatic episode of my life was the ability to, leave my body and still be aware that I lived on. But I have everything else of that near-death experience experienced in my own life. And these experiences of a spiritual nature that you do without your body, like having dreams in which you meet with people and have knowledge come to you that you bring back, or those happen to me in the same way that people that have so-called near-death experiences have. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say with all of that is that, there's so much to our spiritual nature and spiritual realm that we can incorporate in our lives without having to romanticize the fact that there are people that have died and experienced it and come back to tell us. I think it's a great gift and a blessing that they've done that for us. But I don't think that we have to go on any longer thinking, that's where it's at, because what they're coming back with from their experiences is appreciation for life, and to realize that we don't have to worry about hitting this brick wall at the end of our life and make the most out of it as we are living here in order to not, have FOMO or miss out on something we could have done while we were living, because life goes on. It's a continuum, and you have an opportunity when you are here to create with the body that you inhabit, with the friends that you are here, and to be part of that life from an inspiration that's probably already inside of you before you were even born. And so with that knowledge, life becomes a lot more exciting, I thought, for me as well, because actually when that moment that I was telling you about, that trauma moment where I had a chance to go to the other side and I chose, hell no, I wanted to be here, that kind of woke me up, because I was 36 at that time. And I remembered until then, I had lived a very wistful life of romanticizing spirit and wanting the other side to be so much closer than I felt it, and dreaming that, these lucky people that got to be on the other side and come back to tell us about it. And I was completely cured from that by the time that I had an opportunity to go. It was like, all of a sudden I understood how precious it is to have life and to do something with it that you can only do when you're in a body, when you have the ability to, live, breathe, and create the way we do. So since that moment, I noticed actually that is a shared phenomenon with people that have near-death experiences. When they do get a chance to come back and they choose to be, to live the next chapter of their lives, they appreciate their lives so much more, because all of a sudden they understand what they can do, what's possible while you're here. And that was a big moment for me to realize that I was in that same boat. It was like, it's exciting for me now to be alive, and it wasn't before that moment. It's a total turnaround for me.
Oh, that's so
So,
beautiful.
yeah,
So beautiful, right?
yeah.
Do you think how did you know that you were having a near death experience, right? Like, was it a knowing? And I guess the follow-up question to that is like, so was it fear that said hell no, or was it like, I don't need to have that?
I say it was, I don't need to have that. And I wanted to summon all my energy to make sure that I stuck with my body and that I could make that to pull through.
So you
Because,
felt like you're being pulled out?
yeah, definitely. Because I mean, there was I had a trauma birth with my son. And so there was an abruption and I was losing my blood really quickly. I lost over half my blood. And so I did actually sense that tunnel sensation starting to happen. And don't forget, I studied near-death experiences and spirituality for like 10 plus years. So I recognized that whirlwind tunnel, about 6 foot in diameter. And outside of that was a total chaos of, saving our lives. And inside of that was that peace and that surrendered, like whatever comes. And it was so funny because somewhere in that peace and surrender, I still had the voice of my body that said, hell no, I want to be here, because I had 2 daughters. My son was the third one. And I wanted to be here for them, because in that moment, I knew my husband could take care of things because he was a grown up, and my baby was still part of me. So I didn't also, he didn't come to my mind, because we were still one, person pretty much. So I wanted to be here for them. And that moment froze in my brain. And I remember that took over my full awareness. And I think that, combined with the strong medicine that they gave me, knocked my physical body out to the point that I didn't have a spiritual experience in that moment. But they did think they had lost me. And so I did reset fully from the edge of life and death. And so when I came to and they started, giving me blood and I started coming back to awareness, I had that same spiritual sense come back, because now my body was taken care of again. And the spiritual sense could, even though I had never been upright in the hospital, it could count exactly when my husband was entering the front door and going up the elevator and count, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, open the door. Hi, honey, there you are, kind of thing. And so I realized that your spiritual senses are a very strong part of your being, but they are filtered through your physical experience. And I think that's how I've come to make sense out of that experience, because I have proven to myself in so many ways and so many times the existence and the truth of the spiritual realm, that I didn't have to have a dramatic death in my physical body in order to separate my spirit out so that I could access it. I kind of feel that that is how I've come to understand is the grace for most of these people that have near-death experiences, so their body can get out of the way and they can remember their spiritual senses, because that's also very much what I understand happened to Dannion, who was in his life lost in a very selfish lifestyle. And he was a real badass. And, he was, for example, he says he was raised in the Bible Belt. And if anyone was worthy of going to hell, it would have been him, he said. And so, as you will read in his book, which was the inspiration for my children's book, that when he got yanked out of the body, when he died, he got access to a realm of unconditional love and light that was in no way connected to the way he had behaved in his body, but it did put him back to who he truly was himself. And so he was able to remember from that experience. And so when he came back, he had to build himself up and begin living from that place of remembering his spiritual self. And that was the difference between him and me, because while he helped me remember my own spiritual experiences and my own spiritual nature, I had him throughout my whole life, independent of my body. And I was not so much inhibited through my physical self. I was just trying to make sense out of myself. And so he helped me do that. But once I oriented myself, I was able to get these spiritual experiences and allow them a place in my body, so I didn't have to kill it off.
Oh, that's so interesting. So when you met Dannion, Like, what was
Yeah.
that experience like?
It was like meeting old friends. It was just such a familiar feeling. It was like someone I had known all my life. And he just gives the biggest bear hugs. I kind of relate to him as a person who has a boombox heart. He's just all love, And in a way, he's, of course, bit of a showman, so he has a lot of fun and flair with that, and so it was really fun. My husband also felt really close to him, and so they're very similar people, and so it was just a meeting of friends. But then what happened to me afterwards, after we had met, it started to wake up my spiritual faculties, and I started having experiences in my dreams where I would meet with him in my dreams, and he would teach me things, and I know we were in some spiritual realm, and it was I think the beginning of me waking up, my own spiritual faculties, I suppose. And so then I remember I was already an artist at the time, and I was doing one of those expos, the new age expos,
Mm-hmm.
and he was speaking there, and I was there to show my portrait art, and my husband and I traveled down. And so I remember him speaking, and he said, I'm getting up and I'm going to give you all a new presentation today that I haven't shared with anyone. And he began to speak to the audience. And I said that, I was like, this is awfully familiar. And I started recognizing that he had taught me these things in my sleep, in my dream, and I had brought some of it back. So this is the kind of nature that revealed, I think, our spiritual essence. This kind of training that I started getting, and it wasn't anything that he was really physically associated with. It's not like he said, "Yeah, I know I'm doing this to you," but it was just that our spirits were of a similar frequency, I think, and it woke me up to the language of my soul that I think is what propelled me on the path that got me deeper into my artwork and into writing this children's book, and
Oh,
that I've been using with my art since then. So it's been a great gift for me to meet him, to
sure.
wake that up in me. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I feel like we get into these flow states, especially like people who create content or who are artists, musicians, authors, they can get into these flow states. And people have stated, right? Like when they're in these flow states, that their inspiration just flows to them. It's like flowing through them. Like they're connecting
Yeah.
with something higher than themselves, and like the words just flow. They don't really know what they're writing until they're done, and they're reviewing it, and they're like, where do these words come from? Or an artist just throws paint on a canvas and just goes to town, and next thing you know, there's a masterpiece, right? Like, but they don't know how it got there. When you're writing this book or when you're painting, are you tapping into that too?
I definitely feel that, yes, I tap into something bigger than myself. The inspiration is bigger than I am. And that was the case for this book as well. But then I also had to learn the lessons to not claim it afterwards, like make it, oh, that's my product, like my ego had to get out of the way, which is something that I've had to learn in my artwork a lot, because as a portrait artist, if you put your ego in the work, then everybody that you create ends up looking like you. And so I had to
Like the
kind of
Mona
learn.
Lisa, right?
Yeah. And I had to learn to get out of the way so that I could feel and see the person that I was trying to capture. And in doing so, I very often tap into something bigger than either one of us. And I start connecting, especially if the person has passed away, I connect with their soul in a way that gives me access to information or feelings that I had no business knowing without ever having met them, for example. And that again is another confirmation of a realm that's so much bigger than the physical reality we live in. And it happens to me in dreams, and it happens to me with this book. For example, I tried after this book, I felt a strong urge to write this book. And I think it is a little bit of both, to tell you the truth, because I don't think it just flows into you abstractly. I think you have to start with a desire and an idea, and then you get a complementary, influx of inspiration to kind of build this idea. That's how it happened to me. And then of course I try to, steer that again, because now I'm like, okay, I'm behind the wheel. I like this project. I'm going to go make it happen this way or that way. And every one of these doors kept closing, and to the point that I felt so frustrated with this project that I was like, I put it on the shelf. It's like, fine, it's just gonna die. It's not going to ever see the light of day. I'm done with it. And that was in 2013, actually. And then life took another turn and another turn, and it out of my hands completely. And then the book itself had a near-death experience, because it came back to life.
Oh,
And
wow. Full
right.
circle.
Yeah, I came full circle back to realizing that everything we experience is, if you connect it with spirit, it becomes bigger than yourself. And so this book found its way into the limelight, independent of me. And but when the publishers found out that I had written it through my husband, 3 days later they had the contract because it spoke to them as well. So the book wanted to get out at this point. I had given up on it. So I think those are kind of the lessons I'm learning from being in the flow with spirit. That yes, you bring your ideas to spirit, then spirit answers back. Then you have to get out of the way because it's no longer your size project. It's something that takes on shape and meaning that's going to touch more people than yourself. And
Yeah.
that's what I feel happened with this book as well.
It's larger than us, right? Like
Yes,
this is meant to happen, so it's gonna
yes.
happen.
And it
Even if
has
you
a
throw it on the
timing.
shelf. Yeah. You throw
Hmm.
it on the shelf, guess what?
Right.
It's coming back.
And I can see now, because hindsight's 2020, but it has a timing all its own. And it was a timing that I couldn't compute with my human mind, with my body's mind, because now looking back, I see how much I've grown and how much I learned from not only writing the book, but from life itself so that I could represent the book. And, for example, this whole story of should I have a near death experience, or, the fact, I mean, there's millions of us out there who will never have a near death experience, but yet we still know the truth of spirit and the fact that life doesn't end at death. And so I'm one of those people. I was fortunate enough to not have to die, because I was also fortunate enough to be able to wake up enough of my spiritual faculties to know with 100% certainty that life does go on through my experiences, not because I was told by somebody who lived it through their experiences. And I think all of us have spiritual faculties that are starting to turn on left and right now. And together we build the bigger picture, and we don't have to necessarily do it through dying, even though it's been wonderful that those who have brought back the information for us.
Sure. How do you experience reality though? Right? Like with these newly um, strengthened gifts that you've strengthened over the years.
Yeah. I have like mentioned the rabbit hole. I've really developed philosophies, and I don't know if you have time to hear one of them, but
I
or if
do.
that's
I'll make
appropriate.
time. I will make
Because
time.
we're talking about children's book, but for one example, I read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, and what's super cool to me is that he talks in there the nature of our reality, and in our reality, he says there's three laws we live by. One is that everything, as time progresses, the universe expands. As time progresses, we remember our past, and as time progresses, everything increases in entropy and everything goes towards chaos. And I realized, okay, well, that's a law we cannot deny, but how do I make sense out of these things that just kind of fall into place and are just perfectly lining up, spiritual clues and synchronicities? And I realized a scientist as brilliant as Stephen Hawkins, they have such large minds and rational understanding that they tend to think away anything of spirit. So they just see life as material, in a material universe. And I realized that's only one half of the coin. The other half is spirit. Spirit and matter are two halves of one whole. So what I did is I flipped over those three laws, because I used Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so I said, well, if these are the laws of our material world that we live in, then spirit, being its complementary half, must have equal and opposite laws. I think it's so cool, because when you do that, it's exactly what we all experience as we have our spiritual experiences. Because as time exists, the universe contracts, it comes into oneness and togetherness, and it comes back to single point or 0 point. As time exists, everything decreases in entropy, which means everything falls into place and everything comes into perfection. And the third law is, as time progresses, or as time exists, we remember our future and not our past. And I realized, oh my gosh, that is such a fascinating insight for me, because that explains that everybody who has meditation or a spiritual experience of some kind gets a piece of the puzzle, sees themselves healed, sees themselves into some future scenario where things are worked out, or loved ones are reunited. And this is not something that we are taught through religious understanding, which came through somebody's brain, as something that happened to us in our past, that we fell from grace and we are these ugly sinners that just have to claw our way back to this perfection. in our spiritual senses, we remember our future. So instead of being sad about what we've lost, we actually could be really excited about what we are becoming. And so with those two dynamics, what I'm realizing is that I have just developed within my own world an ability to navigate what belongs to my physical experience and what belongs to my spiritual senses. And so I tend to make sense out of life pretty quickly, because when something comes to me, I can easily calibrate which half of that coin does it belong to, and how do I find a place for it. So I feel nowadays pretty oriented towards making sense out of, what voice is inspiring me, or what challenge is before me, and how to respond accordingly.
Oh. So when you receive information, or you're receiving from that spiritual side of the house, does it come in flashes? Like, obviously we experience reality with our five senses, right? But our intuition, I think, is our link to the spiritual side, which is not that at all. Like, third eye feeling, sensitivity, energies. I feel like that's how we interpret the spiritual world and receive information and data from that. Is that how you perceive the spiritual world? Is through intuition, third eye, or imagination, and like flashes of visions?
I tend not to say it's going to be one way or the other. And lately, having come full circle through all the ways of describing it, third eye and this gift and that gift, I'm just thinking of it now as a simple form of like the Holy Spirit, just basically information coming in for whatever faculty is available. And that information needs to be, processed or digested so that it can find a place in this world to bring healing. And it can come through dreams, it can come through, feelings, it can come through a song, it can come through, just the timing of some friend showing up and giving me a message. So I realized that, spirit is active in all of us. And for me, it's like one voice of, like, obviously you've been described as the Holy Spirit, but it's a spirit that can show up anywhere at any time. And it's like a little path of breadcrumbs, like leading Hansel and Gretel, or just, clues that just finding me. But the more I think about it, the more I build on these insights, the more I realize it's putting pieces of a puzzle in place. It's giving me a perspective that keeps growing, and it keeps giving me context rather than making me more confused. So I trust the insights that I'm getting from that place. If it brings wholeness, it brings healing, then I know it's from a place of spirit that I can trust.
Breadcrumb. It's leading by breadcrumbs to your book, Danny's Day in Heaven, right? Like, and allowing them to see these teachings inside this book. Do they, like, kids being kids and testing this out on your grandkids, did they pick up on like the theme, like this is a near death, or this has to deal with death, and there's something more to
they do
this reality?
Yeah, they do. And I definitely make sure that I don't discredit the way we experience death looking from this side at it, because it is a physical experience, and physical bodies do die, and physical bodies do disappear after that. But that the idea that there's a transition from your physical self into your spiritual self, and that's where the story continues. That's where the person who has died is now expressing himself. So that there's heaven, and then there's earth, and then there's the idea that in the spiritual life you still have the ability to love and to communicate. You just don't have a body to do it. And so that's a distinction that I share with my kids and my grandkids and kids in general. And I find that it's a natural understanding for children, because their imagination is so strong, and they're just new to their bodies anyway. They learn how to work it. So the idea that there's more than a body seems very natural to children. And I think it's something we unlearn rather than something we have to learn.
Yeah. They're like, come on, guys, you're not these bodies. Like, we've known this. And then they hit 7, and then they, then we narrow down their concentration and awareness and try to make them logical and analytical like us. And then, you know what I mean? Right. So I think it's great that you've written this book, and you've done the not animation, but the artwork as well, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that's right behind you, and people.
I have the book here too. This is the cover of it, but I have, I guess, a little stories. I mean, it's like one scene in the book where I try to describe, what it would look
Sure.
like in heaven. And so that was actually something I struggled with because I used to be a science student and I have a pretty strong analytical mind myself. And one of the things I struggled with in my journey was who was I to represent what the other side looks like if I hadn't physically, died and been there and said all these things. And so I came to conclude that that was a misinterpretation, because it's this world that's facts and that's, shapes and everything. It's the other side is fluid and it's unconditionally supportive and it's made out of light and it shapes itself according to our consciousness. And so what was most important for me was not that I gave it certain shapes, but how these shapes felt and what it represented, so that it can wake up in the person that's reading the book what it feels like for you and your own memories and your own interaction with the other side. Because I truly believe that is part of all of our inner makeup, is that we have access to spirit, and we'll remember and we'll activate this by putting ourselves in a position to wake it up. And I hope that these images contribute to that.
Sure. I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
Where can people buy the book and how can they connect with you?
Well, the book is on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Beyond Words, my publisher. Also on my website. My website is makfineart.com. And on that website, there'll be a link to anywhere, where the book is sold. But yeah, you can find it online.
That's awesome.
Or in a bookstore near you.
So how did you get the inspiration for the non-physical, right? Like, was it your meta-analysis of all of the near-death experiences and just kind of collectively piece that together? Or was it off of Dannion's interpretation of what it looked like?
No, my own experiences, because like I said, I have strong experiences from the other side, and just sticking with the questions forever and forever, because it meant something to me. And until the answers came, I would just stick with the questions. So in the end, it is my own experience. It did get started by Dannion. It did get inspired by countless other people that had near-death experiences, and then finding these common elements, the world of light and the world where you have your life review, and, the elements that are, rising to the top that overlap with other people are in this book. But in the end, that's, I think, why the journey took a considerable amount of time. I had to make it my own, and I had to be able to vouch for the truth of it, so that I wasn't borrowing information and I could actually speak about it from a place of, authenticity, that this is 100% a representation of a spiritual reality that is there for all of us.
I love it. This, like a near-death experience, this has been timeless. This conversation with you, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on. This has been fantastic. And I'm really excited to see where this book goes, because I think it's interesting that your target audience are the children, right? But you got to get through those parents first, right? So it's like, how do we break through those programs and kind of awaken? You're awakening more than just the kids, you're the parents as well, which usually mostly happens, right? Like we live through our children. But again,
but I think it's appropriate. I think the parents, from what I can see, are really resonating with the book because they feel the truth of it. And then, death is not just a heavy topic, but there's an element of death that's also a sacred topic. You want to take it, with the proper amount of respect, I think, because it brings forth such strong feelings in people. So I think it is appropriate for the parents to take this book to their children, and instead of me having, big reading parties with children, to just, maybe it'll come, but to just take on the topic. I think the intimacy of, a parent and a child is the perfect setup for this.
It's a conversation starter, right?
Yeah,
like, hey, Dad, what happens when we die, right? Because for the longest time, Western civilization has basically ignored it. I mean, we hide from it. We look at funerals now, like they're closed casket, some of them, right? And you don't want to see the body, where in some cultures it's wide open. Look at India, like the bodies are in the streets, and they're very open to the idea of death, and that we. But even there,
they're open to the idea of death, but still, it's all seen through a cultural lens. And while that's beautiful, at the same time, our world is getting smaller, and these cultural lenses are beginning to mix. And there's so many people that are looking outside of their traditions, and that starts the questioning. Then, well, why was I taught that? Was that even true? And so, going beyond that question to the fundamental, ingredients is what I think this book contributes, so that you can then add to it your culture or your tradition or your belief system, because it's a non-denominational interpretation of what we now know happens when you die. And then at the end of the book, there's a list of questions so that you can invite discussion, and let your children, kind of share their feelings or their insights, and you as parents as well. So yeah, it's definitely not like a finished product. It's a book that invites a lot more thinking and philosophy.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I can't wait to see where this goes for you.
Thank you.
Any last thoughts that you want to share?
Well, thanks for drawing out all those little rabbit hole insights out of me, because I had no idea that I was going to share them, but I would love to continue the discussion with you.
Surprise.
Yeah. Right. Or anybody else that has, this is what I love to do, is to just break open the discussion with the nature of spirit, not to replace the nature of our reality, but to supplement it. And so if you have anything to contribute, shoot me a line, or find a way to get in touch through my website or Instagram or Facebook. It's same handle, MAK Fine Art. And maybe we can keep exploring together.